Hello, this is Maverick Brenly, back again with another Screencast, this time talking about the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Well, what does it even say? The 19th Amendment says, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, and Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." That's huge. It may not seem like a lot, it's a very short amendment compared to some of the others, but those words pack a punch. Essentially what this means is you cannot refuse someone the right to vote just by virtue of them being a woman. That was, once it was ratified on August 18th, 1920, it was the biggest advancement in voting rights, voting suffrage of any point in the United States history, giving millions of women the ability to vote when beforehand they were not able to. What was the life like before the 19th Amendment? Well, essentially, women couldn't vote. The Constitution only gave the right to vote to land-owning white males, and that's a very small group, but throughout the 1800s, that small little group eventually expanded because during the mid-1800s, a majority of states allowed land-owning men to vote, which gets rid of that, and theoretically, after the Civil War, the 14th and 15th Amendments gave African-American men the right to vote. So you get rid of that, and all you're left with is adult males. And so, of course, with many exceptions, the largest group that still doesn't have suffrage is women. So a lot of women in the United States thought that shouldn't be the case, so they, started the fight for women's suffrage and equality. The fight for the ratification of the 19th Amendment was a very long and difficult one, but many would agree that process started in Seneca Falls, New York on July 19th and 20th, 1848. Here, the first ever women's rights convention in the entire world was held. Organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, they, along with many other men and women, met to discuss the advancement of women's rights. Here they drafted and signed a document called the Declaration of Sentiments. The Declaration of Sentiments was a spoof, if you will, on the Declaration of Independence. As the Declaration of Independence says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The Declaration of Sentiments says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." And just as the Declaration of Independence has a list of grievances that the colonies felt were against them from the king, the Declaration of Sentiments has a list of grievances that society has committed against women. And many of the people attending this convention signed the Declaration of Sentiments. Many notable signers include, of course, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she organized the event, along with Margaret Wilson Pryor, and even Frederick Douglass, as you can see up here. Quick anecdote. Over the summer, I was able to go to Seneca Falls and attend the Women's Rights National Historic Park, which is where these pictures are from. And I was able to see the exact church in which they signed the Declaration of Sentiments. And there was a little park next to it, and it had this cool mural, which has the women's suffrage flag superimposed upon many of the signers, and a quote from the first line of the Declaration of Sentiments. And below had a waterfall, cool waterworks thing, and it had the Declaration of Sentiments in it, and it was very cool. End anecdote. The women's suffrage movement is born. Many of these women started to form different groups and associations in order to spread the word on women's suffrage. It wasn't really a very popular or even well-known idea at first, and they needed to spread their cause as to why women ought to vote. The two main groups, both formed in 1869. The first of which was the National Women's Suffrage Association, formed by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the other was the American Women's Suffrage Association, formed by Lucy Stone and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Although similar in nature, these two groups definitely did have a few differences. For starters, the National Women's Suffrage Association had a few other initiatives to help women besides just the right to vote. But the American Women's Suffrage Association just solely focused on the right to vote. They thought that that would increase recruitment and allow them to get their ideas out better by just focusing on the one issue. The reason why there were two groups in the first place was arguments over strategy. The the American Women's Suffrage Association, headed in New York, folk thought that working on the state level would be a superior strategy than the national level. But the National Women's Suffrage Association disagreed. They believed that working for a constitutional amendment would be the better idea to go with instead of working state by state. But eventually, the two groups, with the American Women's Suffrage Association waning, decided to merge to form the National American Women Suffrage Association. This group had one goal in mind: getting women the right to vote through a constitutional amendment, and they were gonna get that. There was only one problem with that, though, and just like any time there tries to be any progress in society, many people were very much opposed to suffrage. Many people did not want to rock the boat. They didn't want to change the status quo. They were fine. They were happy with how things were, and they were not about to change. Many of these anti-suffragettes believed in the idea of a male-headed family, and that the male is supposed to be, obviously, the head of the family, and they're the one who goes to work, is the breadwinner, does the voting, is, the intellectual head of the household, and the woman is just supposed to, stay home with the kids, keep things tidy around the house. But suffragettes believed in a concept called the individual citizen. Anybody can go get a job, anybody can, go vote. Like, you don't have to be this man to go vote. Just go vote, Women have that capacity. But many people wanted to keep it the way it was. Wanted to keep a male-headed family. And there were many quite awful, this political cartoon, it is kind of harsh, but there was way worse ones that I could have chose. It was bad. But many of the other arguments that people had against suffrage was because women took care of the home and the children, they didn't want to vote. They don't need to vote. They don't want to vote anyway. They didn't have the time to stay up to politics, stay updated in the world. It's they're at home dealing with the kids. They can't pay attention with man's politics. Or they straight up lack the expertise or mental capacity to even offer a useful opinion about political issues. A totally crazy stuff. Obviously, none of this is true. But a lot of people believed it. And it really pushed back the suffrage movement a lot, because a lot of people didn't like what these suffragettes were doing. They didn't want anything to change. And that was their MO. They were like, no, this can't happen. You can't change nothing. Don't do it. Don't change nothing. What these opposition movements did was prevented many attempts at passing a women's suffrage amendment from getting through. The first attempt at a equal voting rights amendment for women happened in 1878. This man here, Senator Aaron Sargent of California, introduced an amendment to the United States Constitution that would grant women the right to vote. It is worded exactly the same as the current 19th Amendment. So his amendment was put upon the Senate Committee on Privileges and Elections, but what they did was they pigeonholed it for 9 years, and eventually they did vote on it in 1887, 9 years after 1878, and it failed in the Senate pretty hard by 16 to 34. The next time is 1918. In this time, the House of Representatives does pass, with its majority that it needs, a equal rights voting amendment to the United States Constitution, and it goes to the Senate, and the Senate is not able to pass it by one single vote. And so what ends up happening is members of the National American Women's Suffrage Association find out who voted against it, and in the midterm election of 1918 made sure that those people didn't get reelected, which definitely helped the Senate pass the 19th Amendment 2 years later. The 19th Amendment is finally ratified on August 18th, 1920, and which gives women now the right to vote. Something that definitely helped this get through was support by President Woodrow Wilson. For the longest time, he was not a supporter of women's suffrage, but World War I, even though some thought that it would hinder the suffrage movement, they were actually able to use it to their advantage. The suffragettes they almost stopped petitioning for suffrage and worked hardcore on the war effort, and to try to show people in power like Woodrow Wilson that they could deal. Like they had what it takes to get through it. And Woodrow Wilson was able to see that, and he realized that women do deserve the right to vote because of how strong and how dedicated they were during World War I. And he eventually, on September 30th, 1918, addressed the Senate and implored them to support women's suffrage, an amendment for women's suffrage. And that's what helped get the 19th Amendment passed. Throughout 1919 and 1920 was when the amendment went out to the states to be ratified, and it came down to Tennessee, which was the 36th state to have to ratify the amendment to make it an actual amendment of the United States Constitution, and it came down to one vote, which allowed for the passage of the 19th Amendment. One of the only major Supreme Court cases involving the 19th Amendment is this one, Lesser v. Garnett. This is in which Maryland Judge Oscar Lesser tried to rid 2 women from the voting rolls in his state. This is because the Maryland Constitution only gives suffrage to men. He believed that any state that had ratified the amendment, which had constitutions that prohibited women from voting, was actually unable to do that in the first place because it had gone against the Constitution of the people. He also believed that the ratifications of the Tennessee and West Virginia ratification of this 19th Amendment was invalid because they did so without following the rules of legislative procedure in those states. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 against Oscar Lesser, saying that it does not matter that the constitutions of the states are against what the Constitution now says, given the 19th Amendment. And also, it does not matter that Tennessee and West Virginia were, quote, invalid because it was certified in their state by the Secretary of State, so it does not matter, and that point is moot. So the Supreme Court case fully constitutionally establishes the 19th Amendment. It says, yes, 19th Amendment is here, and it's here to stay. The 19th Amendment today. 100 years ago was when the 19th Amendment was passed, giving women the right to vote. But throughout those last 100 years, it has been difficult for many different groups of women to actually gain that right to vote that the 19th Amendment was supposed to afford to them. Asian women were not able to vote until the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1943. Native American women weren't able to vote until 1924, but not all of them until 1962. And black women weren't able to vote until the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. Along with that, the League of Women Voters was formed a few months after the passage of the 19th Amendment by Carrie Chapman Catt in order to support women voters all across the United States, which still exists to this day. And of course, Hillary Clinton was able to become the first woman to be nominated to a major political party for president in 2016. Now what I think the 28th Amendment should be. The 28th Amendment should effectively repeal the Electoral College and have the process of electing the president be by a simple popular vote. This is because I don't like the Electoral College one bit, especially because one electoral vote for in Wyoming is for every 195,000 people, but in California it's for every 712,000 people. That's just not right. I don't like it. It should be a popular vote. This political cartoon's kind of funny. Whatever. Here is my works cited.